So my name is Raina Ripple. I am working with Halt the Harm Network, and I have come to this from many years of working on oil and gas and other extractive industry issues, primarily here in Southwestern Pennsylvania, but in my previous job with something called the Southwest Pennsylvania Environmental Health Project, I got to know a lot of people from around the country and also some people from around the world working on fracking issues. So what we thought we'd start with today is just a brief overview of the scope of the issue, which is where we're starting with this slide, just showing the different shale plays, of course, that many of you are very familiar with in other parts of the country. I want to preface this, first of all, by saying that unfortunately, Don was not able to join us from New Mexico, so you would have seen his name. But we did get some information from Don, and so we'll have a clip from Don. But otherwise, I'm really pleased to be, again, working with Halt the Harm, and thank you, Ryan, for doing all of our tech support in the background, and to be joined by Lori Brunswig from Colorado, Patrice Tomczyk and Barbara Brandon from here in Pennsylvania, and then, as I said, we would have had Don Schreiber as well from New Mexico, but he had to stay home for reasons of health. So as you can see in this slide, this is clearly a widespread issue. And what we're going to do with today's presentation is we're going to start to dive in a little bit more closely and look at how this is impacting people, again, really at the front lines. And a lot of the work that I had done previously was looking at health impacts. And that's where we're going to have some really good perspective brought up by Barbara to close us out on the health impacts. But overall, we really want to look at how methane is affecting us at, again, that frontline basis, and what this EPA rulemaking could possibly mean for improving our health and improving our communities. So with that, I'm going to move on to the next slide. All right, so and I never know for sure. I've seen a lot of names pop up in the registrations that I recognize, but sometimes people need a little bit of a primer on what we're dealing with. And so I'll just say a few things here about these different sites and these different pieces of infrastructure that you're looking at. And we're going to get into some detail about how methane emits from these various places. What I'd like to add here is that not just methane, but certainly what we call volatile, or what are called volatile organic compounds, a lot of chemicals are emitted from these various facilities in conjunction with methane. So one of the things that I think it's really important to point out with these slides is, as we decrease and or stop the venting of methane, we're also going to improve everybody's health and well-being by eliminating the chemicals that are coming out alongside this. So what you see on a well pad, and then the storage tanks, certainly the compressor stations, pipelines, of course, are everywhere. All of that stuff is venting, but it's not just venting methane, it's also venting these volatile organic compounds, and that can be very harmful, especially for human health at the local level. Next slide. So again, this is what we're really looking at, and sometimes I think it's hard for people to understand that really natural gas, aka the thing that's being pulled up by fracking, is primarily methane. It's upwards of 80%. It's really just the methane. And then you have, as I said, these other chemicals that are coming alongside methane. And so as these chemicals come up, and Barbara's going to get into more of the health impacts in a minute, but you can see we've got these hazardous air pollutants, you've got the volatile organic compounds, particulate matter. All of these things are certainly concerning from a health perspective, and very much so from a local health perspective. Methane as well, and again, Barbara will cover this in her portion, really is a concern both from a localized health perspective, but also from a climate forcing perspective. Next slide. So as you can see, and we're going to go through a couple of what we call OGI or FLIR camera images, but this is in so many ways, for so long, it's been the hidden problem, right? So it's something that you see the oil, you see the pump jack, you see the drill rig, but you don't necessarily see the massive clouds of methane emission, which is essentially invisible to the naked eye. So that's where that Dawn Schreiber passed on to me from New Mexico, so that we can really uncover, what has been hidden in these methane emissions. Next slide. So, and then just to wrap up my portion of this, and I'll pop back in to say a few things about Dawn's part of the presentation, but all of the work that I did when we founded the Environmental Health Project was really looking at how oil and gas overall affected the local community. And we were trying to do a lot of community-based research on this, but as you can see, there's a long list of community impacts. And this is something that we saw in droves, really, in all of the work that I did previously, and now the work that I'm doing with Halt the Harm. And what we're trying to do is to really build a movement around this. And I'm really pleased, again, to welcome the other panelists to join us in addressing some of these issues and framing this in the context of methane. And so with that, I will turn it over to Patrice.
Right. Thank you, Raina. Thank you for all that information. And I can attest to a lot of those community impacts. So I just want to introduce myself. My name is Patrice Tomczyk, and I'm the National Field Manager for Moms Clean Air Force, which is a community of over 1 million moms and dads, and really anybody who cares about children united to protect their health from air pollution and climate change. I live in Gibsonia, Pennsylvania, which is about 30 minutes north of Pittsburgh. And it's in the southwestern part of the state. And I want to share a little bit about my story with you, and then talk about the proposed Environmental Protection Agency's oil and gas methane rule. I got involved about 7 years ago when the gas industry came to my town and wanted to frack under my kids' schools. And a group of parents came together and formed the Mars Parent Group to protest the well pad from being built about a half a mile away, and also the drilling that was being proposed underneath the schools. And I really remember how much anxiety that many in the group, and including myself, really went through. And there was a lot of concern over the impacts with good reason. And I was really concerned about the harmful pollutants and things like benzene that you can find in and around oil and gas operations, and what that would mean to my kids if they would be exposed to it. And thankfully, as a community, we were able to stop the drilling from happening directly under our school, but we weren't able to stop the wells from going in and being developed at the well pad. Like I said, that was a half a mile away. And so this really launched my work here, on protecting children and families from this oil and gas pollution. And I joined Moms Clean Air Force about 6 years ago as their oil and gas specialist, and now I manage that program. So that's how I came to be here. If we can, I want to talk a little bit about the methane rules. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Hello, can anybody hear me?
Sorry, Patrice, I think getting to it.
Oh, okay. So when we talk about the proposed EPA methane rule, the reason why we need federal rules they're needed to create baseline protections for all children across the nation, and especially for the states that have really failed to enact any kind of meaningful oil and gas methane protections. And in Pennsylvania, the state is moving forward with a state level methane rule that would allow half of the methane emissions from existing oil and gas operations to continue to go unchecked. And so the EPA rule would be more protective of public health and the climate and is needed. And however, regulations need to be enforced, right? So even the best regulations on the books need to be enforced in order for communities to realize those protections. And you'll hear more about that from the other speakers today. So I just want to talk about the rule itself. And recently the EPA proposed a rule that will cut methane and the other harmful air pollutants like VOCs that Raina just talked about from newly built and the older existing oil and gas operations. And this is really significant because for the first time, there will be methane rules that apply to the nation's nearly 1 million older existing oil and gas operations. And so the proposed rule would reduce 41 million tons of methane, 12 million tons of VOCs, and 480,000 tons of hazardous air pollutants by the year 2035. And having rules that hold the oil and gas industry accountable for their pollution will be an improvement over relying on the way it's happening currently, which is self-reported estimates. And one study found that methane emission levels can be 60% greater than what the oil and gas industry self-reports. So there's an opportunity right now to give comments on this proposal, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. I'm going to get into some nuts and bolts of it. I don't think that anybody needs to be a technical expert at all to give comments. Personal stories are the most important, most impactful, and I really want to encourage that. But just to give you some background about what this rule does cover and doesn't cover, and maybe some opportunities to speak about that. Next slide, please. So what does the current rule cover? It covers new and existing sources of oil and gas operations. And so like I said, it will cover for the first time, nearly 1 million older pre-existing oil and gas wells, which is really important. These are wells that would be built, the existing wells would be built or modified before the 2015 and account for 93% of the nation's wells and are responsible for the vast majority of the industry's methane pollution problem. And so it would require monitoring for leaks where the methane and the VOCs can be escaping out into the atmosphere once every 3 months from larger well sites. And the second bullet point there is requiring the use of non-polluting equipment. So we need to phase out the equipment that is designed to release pollution, and meaning methane and VOCs. And this equipment has a name called pneumatic controllers, which are used a lot throughout industry, and they are very large emitters of methane and VOCs. The next bullet point is ending routine venting. And venting is the releasing of methane and whatever else is accompanying that, like the VOCs, directly into the atmosphere. And this EPA proposal would eliminate the routine venting of gases from wells and require it to be routed to sales lines. And I say routine because it still would allow the venting in emergency for emergency reasons. Strengthening of methane pollution monitoring. The EPA is proposing to allow operators to survey sites, oil and gas operators that is, for leaks, and using advanced methods like aerial screening and optical gas imaging, which Ray and I already talked a little bit about. And the last thing is increasing the focus on community participation. And the EPA plans to require that states identify underserved communities and seek out their input during the regulatory process. And they plan on overcoming linguistic and cultural barriers and promoting sharing information with communities and soliciting input in the early processes. Next slide, please. So what are the gaps in this rule? So although the current rule is a significant and it's an important step forward, there's more to do. And the EPA wants to hear from you about what they need to strengthen. So really, really important. In the spring of 2022, the EPA will come out with what's called a supplemental rule. So right now, this is what's being proposed. There will be another opportunity to give input during a supplemental rule. And this will address issues that aren't covered in the current rule. And so we want to make sure that they hear us loud and clear. And things that aren't covered that we need to have covered would be regular monitoring of all small wells. And under the current EPA's proposal, small oil and gas wells could still escape regular leak monitoring. So there's like a threshold, and wells that are under that threshold are basically exempt. So we can't have this. And this is a big problem since small wells can have large leaks or equipment failures, and that can contribute to really an outsized amount of methane and VOC pollution. So we need coverage of all wells, no exemptions in there. And then the second bullet point is limiting routine flaring. And flaring is a wasteful practice of burning unwanted gas. And that's the picture that you can see here on the slide. That is a flare that's not burning very cleanly at all. And you can tell that by all the black smoke coming off of that on top of that. But flaring is a large source of pollution, including methane and carbon dioxide, and has other hazardous air pollutions. And flares commonly malfunction and they spew their pollutants directly into the atmosphere. So eliminating this practice of routine flaring, as leading states like Colorado and New Mexico have done, is really a common sense step that the EPA can take. And you'll see that the next bullet point is establishing new standards to address abandoned wells. So standards that help to ensure wells are properly shut down and plugged can really ensure that these wells don't leak and could prevent the closure costs of these wells upon taxpayers later when they are termed things like orphan wells. And then incorporating community-based monitoring. So EPA is exploring for the first time, exploring ways to incorporate emission monitoring results. So community monitoring generated by community groups and other third parties into its standards. And community monitoring would help the EPA to prioritize fixing major leaks that are harming nearby communities more quickly. So it would be great to have lots of comments on that. And next slide, please. Taking action. So it's really important for folks to speak up and take action, and just want to outline just some common ways that are really important to speak up. And one would be meeting with lawmakers and agencies. And at Moms Clean Air Force, we do this all the time. Please contact me. I'll put you in touch. We'll get you there. It's so important that lawmakers hear why methane rules and protections from the oil and gas pollution are needed. They need those personal perspectives. That's what they carry with them whenever they are debating issues. And so they actually relay these stories. So important. And then petitions to gather signatures, which gets things like methane issues on the radar of lawmakers and the regulatory agencies, is real important. Social media can be very effective of elevating issues. everyone is very much on social media. Letters to the editor and opinion editorials get a lot more eyes on the issues, public eyes. And then participating in public hearings and comment sessions, which I'll address on the next slide, please. So like I said earlier, the public comments are open now on this methane rule until January 31st, which is Monday. So there's two ways to take action, and one is by in the chat too. You need to include the docket ID number, and then you can upload any information you want there and leave any kind of comments. Really easy way to do that. And then the other way is to sign a petition. So I put a link in there for a general community petition signing, which would automatically send your comments to the EPA. The customized way is really great, but if you don't have time to do that, signing the petition is a great way to get your voice heard too. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Raina for the next slides.
Thank you, Patrice. And I just want to give a quick shout out to the amazing work that Mom's Clean Air Force has done over the years, and specifically Patrice, who I've known again for many, 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 many years. Really just a fantastic group, and I really, truly appreciate you leading us through this somewhat complicated issue. So what I'm going to do with the next slide is I'm actually going to stand in for Don Schreiber, nowhere near as impressive as he is, but what we're going to do is we're going to watch a short video for Don, and then I'm going to do my best to fill in a few details. So we'll go ahead and play that video, and then I'll add a few more things.
There's 30,000 gas and oil wells in the San Juan Basin, so they are everywhere. That's the story of the San Juan Basin, and that's why it's such a big issue. Beyond local, beyond state, national, we're even making a contribution to climate change on a world basis here. Oil and gas impacts exacerbate and accelerate the drought right here where we're standing. You know, it's sad to say that New Mexico kind of shot to national fame recently through NASA photographs from space of the methane hotspot, which was identified as the largest one in North America. That methane leaks out. It's 86 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas, and its chemicals make it harmful and difficult for us to live and work on the ranch. And we're concerned about our children's health, our grandchildren's health, but we're also making a contribution, a negative one, to climate change worldwide. That's not what we want to be famous for. There's 30,000.
Thank you, Dawn, again. So we'll go to the next slide, and what I'm going to try and do really on behalf of Dawn is to just say a few things about really the situation that they're looking at in the San Juan Basin. And then what I did was I created a slide which I think covers some really amazing recent news on this topic. But as you heard already from Dawn's short video, we do have a tremendous number of wells, and this video, or this, I'm sorry, slide points out that the photo you're looking at is actually from a well pad, and it's looking towards Dawn's house in the background. So you can see just how close these specific wells are. And you can also see from this slide just the massive concentration of oil and gas wells, primarily gas wells, in the San Juan Basin that his community and he is dealing with specifically on his ranch. So I'm going to go to the next slide and just quickly point out that these are some of the articles Dawn actually sent me. And these are very recent articles, some of them, one of them from just 2 days ago, which are really pointing out that, again, the data is showing you have a massive hotspot there, and the oil and gas operators are really not doing a good job of reporting. One of the other things I wanted to include on this, and I did actually 2 articles here that people can grab the links from, and we can drop these in the chat too, but this is really a problem, and this is specific to the San Juan Basin, where you had some major actors, ConocoPhillips was one of them, and they're being bought out by smaller companies. And it's essentially an attempt, I believe, on their part, the larger company's part, to really offload older producing and or problem wells. So then we get into the situation, and this is where Don's community and he himself is dealing with this, where you have a smaller company, they're probably having fewer resources to actually deal with the leaks. They're just in there to get what they can and get out. And so I think that's where, again, this is happening, and Lori will talk in a moment about Colorado, but this is happening really throughout the industry, but specifically a lot of this is happening in the San Juan Basin. So I just wanted to point that out from these slides. And let me just grab these links and drop them in the chat so everybody has them. And then I think we're going to move on. Hold on a second. To Lori. And again, I apologize for the last minute change that I had to pinch hit for Dawn. Okay, and Lori, if you want to go ahead and move on, I can grab those links from mine.
Yeah. My name is Lori Brunswick, and I live in Fort Collins, Colorado, which is along the eastern front range of Colorado. So right behind us to the west is the Rocky Mountains. We're about 60 miles north of Denver, 40 miles from Boulder, Colorado here, and 30 miles south of the Wyoming border. So we're north. This area is in the Denver-Julesburg play. So that's kind of gives you an idea of where we're at. I'm a member of the Larimer Alliance, which was organized in 2019 to fight oil and gas in Larimer County that I live in. Here in the state of Colorado, it said we have some of the best oil and gas regulations in the country. And this is partly due to a law that was passed in 2019. It's SB 19181 that requires the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission to consider public health and the environment when they permit oil and gas wells. And it sounds wonderful, and it was created a lot of hope for us here in Colorado. But in reality, it's the oil and gas industry is really so dirty that even with the best regulations and laws, it's questionable that real change will be made as long as oil and gas is allowed. Colorado allows its industry to self-regulate. And so there are some good operators here, and there's some really bad ones here. And so I hope that this EPA methane rule will help us here. There's a picture right now of a tank that's located just outside, just north of Fort Collins, that continues to pollute and cause great harm to the people that live around it. And it's, even though, okay, this is a FLIR camera that, and Ryan, can you start the FLIR or start the video? This is Earthworks work that they do here in Colorado. And that's the tank battery that's, and you can see that you cannot see anything coming off that. But look, that's what really is coming off. It's not clear to the naked eye what's actually happening. And this is in Colorado with all these great laws. So they were required, this company was required to replace that tank And they replaced it with a old tank, a used tank that also now still leaks. So, you know, the next slide, I guess we can see, and it's a screenshot of air monitor that's in real time, where you can go on his website, which is boldair.com, which is spelled BOULDAIR.com. And it shows what you're breathing right there. There's methane. It also has the BTEX chemicals. It provides a lot of information. These are pretty much just in Boulder County right now, and we would love to get one of these, but there's a lot of pressure against that because, I don't know, I guess they don't want us to know that we're breathing benzene and toluene maybe, but because it's not very politically positive for Colorado if we know these things. This was developed by Dr. Helmig, who is an atmospheric scientist in Boulder County, and he was a professor at CU until he started developing and talking about oil and gas, and then he suddenly did not have a job anymore. So now he develops these air monitors, and you can see on the in the screen there's the methane, and then below has a shot of ethane emissions, and then there's kind of a flat line in there, and that's when we had one of the worst fires in Colorado so far in our urban neighborhoods, where there's fire hydrants and equipment and people and water, and it could not fight that fire. And it was 1,000 people lost their homes in one afternoon. And that was just on the 30th of December. You would think that we were out of fire season, but we weren't. And so that flat line is where that well that they were monitoring was shut in, and it wasn't emitting the ethane. Still emitting methane. I'm not sure why, if it was shut in, but they're leaky. All these equipments, they're very leaky. And so I'm hoping for possible change by this rulemaking. This methane, that's our only hope in Colorado. Clearly, it's what we've done here in the state is not helping us. Raina.
Yes, thank you so much, Lori. And can I just say that you have done amazing work in Colorado. And I know I saw a comment from JD that said, you know, don't hold up Colorado. And I think in some ways, from the perspective of Pennsylvania, we look with great envy at Colorado, even though in Colorado you think it's so bad. We sometimes look outside of our region and say, well, it could be worse because we're really, really, really failing here. So with that, we're going to move on to the last portion of our presentation, and we'll switch to the next slide. And we're going to hear from Barbara here in Pennsylvania from a health perspective. So thank you, Barbara.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Thank you, Raina, and thank you all the previous speakers. I really liked Lori's statement that there's no safe way for this industry. It's killing us. And I was a physician anesthesiologist at Children's Hospital Pittsburgh for 35 years. So all that time I lived in Pittsburgh. My motivation was to take the best care of the children. So when I retired, because I just could not run fast enough or type fast enough or think fast enough to continue in that professional activity, I thought, what do the children really need to be able to thrive? They and we need clean air, among other things, but we certainly need clean air. What does methane have to do with air pollution? I think the previous speakers, starting with Raina, gave a good groundwork of that. Methane is colorless and odorless. but it has other things with it that are very toxic. They all come out of the ground together, especially mixed with the fracking chemicals. We haven't mentioned them, but there's quite a lot that could be said about all of them. Other organic compounds in the gas, like benzene, and hazardous substances, including oxides of nitrogen and the small particulate matter, they travel. They don't just sit near the pipelines. They travel with the wind. This morning, I looked at a very interesting presentation by a group in Pittsburgh, and you can see it. If you look at the CREATE lab, you can search on that in Pittsburgh, and it will show you where pollution is moving from the major point sources. They're not emitting methane primarily, they're coke ovens and coal burning plants, but methane travels too just the same, and so do those PM 2.5 particles that result from the deposition of these organic compounds on little particles in the air. It becomes soot. These substances get into our air at every step of the processing of natural gas, from the drill site to the refinery. As was mentioned before, they're vented from compressor stations and they leak from pipelines. Ground level ozone is produced by sunlight in the presence of the volatile organic compounds and oxides of nitrogen, etc. And ozone causes irritation to the breathing passages of our bodies. This is a problem in Pittsburgh. We frequently get inversions and trap ozone, and this is associated with increased emergency room admissions for asthma and bronchiolitis in smaller children. This has been noticed in other parts of the state when drilling operations occur and pipeline digging occurs. It's interesting that these small particles cause inflammation of the entire respiratory tract from the nose to the deepest air spaces in the lungs. And that PM 2.5, it's so small that it easily travels further. One article I read said that it can get from your nose up the olfactory nerves into your brain. Certainly it can get into your brain from your bloodstream, and it causes inflammation everywhere. So it's not so difficult to understand that after this little particle gets into white blood cells and enhances our inflammatory reactions, we're sick. Now, we're lucky that our bodies have a lot of redundancy. 2 lungs, 2 kidneys, for example. Every organ contains many functional units. Some of these can be lost to chronic inflammation and we don't notice anything. But chronic injury leads inevitably to chronic disease, osteoarthritis, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, chronic bronchitis, atherosclerotic vascular disease, and senility are common in our older relatives, and they're all made worse by inflammation. People age at different rates. Maybe I aged faster because I lived in Pittsburgh 35 years. The symptoms that neighbors of the pipelines, compressor stations, and refineries experience may first seem minor, such as coughs, headaches, and fatigue, but over years, these persist, and the medical records show more hospitalizations for pulmonary and cardiovascular diseases in areas where there are many wells, pipelines, and compressor stations. Degenerative neurologic diseases and autism are also more common in these places. The Global Burden of Disease study, I wanted to get some references because I don't just want to make broad statements. Who actually studied this and has the evidence for it? The Global Burden of Disease study is an annual report with hundreds of contributors estimated. They estimated that in 2019, more than 4 million deaths were attributable to particulate air pollution. The Air Quality Life Index from the University of Chicago put the air toll pollution information into human perspective. They wrote that alcohol use reduces life expectancy by 9 months. Unsafe, see, I can hardly read because I have such bad eyes these days. Unsafe water and sanitation problems reduce life expectancy by 7 months. And conflict and terrorism reduce life expectancy just by 7 days. You know, the news gives us all this dramatic information about conflicts and terrorism and all that, and it's horrible, but it's only 7 days when we look at the whole population in the world. The impact of particulate pollution on life expectancy is comparable to that of smoking. So this young child, maybe her mother, gave up smoking because she recognized that the secondhand smoke is just as bad for the child. But the little girl can't escape the particulate matter that comes out of the gas industry, the pipeline, the wells, the compressor station. This girl's playing on her slide and the drill rig is right behind her. Okay, yeah. The impact of particulate pollution on life expectancy is comparable to that of smoking, which is 3 times worse than that of alcohol, drug use, and unsafe water, and 114 times worse than the impact of conflict and terrorism. So does this impact all of us? The definition of a frontline community or a fence line community is being 3 miles, and this little girl is certainly less than 3 miles from that drilling rig, 3 miles within a polluting location. When benzene is part of that pollution, the risk of leukemia is definitely increased, and air pollution travels downwind. There was a very good study from CMU that modeled the effects on of the fracking in the Allegheny Basin from 2006 to 2014. And they showed that, yes, there's local benefits. Some people get jobs and there's some secondary benefit from that. And so all our politicians are totally in favor of this. And they put things in the newspaper saying, our town is going to have an economic rebirth. Look for information later from the Ohio River Valley Institute, which does analyze these kinds of things, and it makes it a little bit more detailed and important, and not quite so true that economic improvements are definitely going to happen. So I got off the track a bit there. This report from CMU showed that the excess deaths happened in places of large population: Pittsburgh, New York, Washington, DC, Cincinnati, places hundreds of miles from where the heart of the pollution was coming from, and from where the economic benefits might be appreciated, not counting the benefits of the boardrooms. So we really want the rules to be more strict and enforcement. We want it to be funded. We want more EPA inspectors hired, and methane should not be allowed to escape from every step of the harvest and the transportation process of natural gas. So as we listed here, all these things, including mental health adversities and learning disabilities, can be tied to these inflammatory diseases that are the result of our exposure to air pollution. I think there might be one more, maybe slide number 19, made a point of how close we are to many places where this pollution is, because we think of it as being on the fracking pad or at the compressor station. And the compressor stations, you might not even recognize them, but they're necessarily along the pipeline to push the gas to the front refinery from the source. They have to vent. That's part of what they're doing, as they're bringing up the pressure in the pipeline. And they are now a leading cause of pollution. So as previously, I think Patrice mentioned, these can be rebuilt in ways that leak much less, and we need to have that done. A lady well, I wanted to mention that the shale and natural gas, no, I didn't say that too well, let me back up. There are community monitoring programs around the country. There is one in Pittsburgh. I dropped into the chat the CREATE lab at CMU, and I put the email of one of the workers there that I heard about this morning. The kind of methods that they use really allow people who are in the community and smell something bad to immediately give a report and get that built into a map that can help the researchers locate the sources of pollution. In Bakersfield, California, the Hispanic workers, living, of course, in a community where there weren't many resources and no one was paying attention, noticed that there was a huge storage tank right across the street from their school. They developed a program for the citizens to capture air. As we saw a picture earlier, you can get a small kind of containment device and get that measured in a very reliable fashion. And they documented that there was a leak of methane that was so great that they had to evacuate several blocks of the local community because of the danger of an explosion. We don't hear about those every day, thank goodness, but it is potentially a problem, and there's no excuse for it. We should be able to get this methane cleaned up. We need the support of the government, because The local place in Allegheny County, their documentation system is much slower than the community-led one. And the state just doesn't even want to hear about it. They very often just lose the reports. And so in California, this near Bakersfield, they were able to document things and at least protect their own community. And previously in Boston, an old city with a lot of old pipelines, they began to realize that there's methane leaks. A lady named Miss Schulman got a detecting device that she could push into the ground in front of her house. And she found it was definitely in the explosive range. I won't give the numbers, but you can look it up in WAPO, and my notes have the link to it. This has brought us to the point where we recognize it's not just in the shale play fields, but in any part of the country where natural gas is being sold, being used. You might have heard of the struggles in Brooklyn to try and shut down a pipeline that's just taking gas to a liquid natural gas export station. The gas industry wants to sell it abroad because now the prices have gone up and they can make more money. And what's going to happen to this stuff abroad? It's going to be made into plastic. So I think we need to protect our health. We're not getting help on this from the industry. We're not getting enough help from the government at every level. In making the methane rules stronger at least gives us a starting point. We need to take more action to protect our children. So I think I should probably stop there and let everybody ask questions and let the other speakers speak more coherently maybe than I'm able to anymore.
Thank you so much, Barbara. You did a fantastic job spelling out the health impacts for us. And that's just wonderful. I just so much love hearing from the experts at the community level and the medical experts. That's been the work that I've done for many years now. So I did capture a couple of questions from the chat, and people should feel free to post more questions. But one of the questions that was asked was about community monitoring. So how, for instance, could a community member or a climate activist get engaged with this concept of community monitoring if and when the EPA methane rule passes? And I don't know if anybody on the panel has an answer to that.
Lori, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, we have a man, and I spoke about that, in Boulder who makes monitoring equipment that provides every possible thing that could be in the air. And I don't know what it costs, but he's providing these for Boulder County. I think there's 5 monitors so far there. And it's a good thing that the EPA is considering community monitoring because, you know, the state and federal government can't afford to monitor everywhere. So it's kind of up to individual groups to try to encourage their community to purchase these monitoring equipment. And that can be, if someone wants to see what he does, his Dr. Helmig is his name, and his business is boldair.com, and that's spelled BOULDAIR.com, Boldair. And so that's an option. You can call him. He's very nice. I don't know what these pieces of equipment cost, but I think he works with other communities and other states, and so that's his business.
And I could say a little bit. I'm not very close. I'm not as close to these issues as Lori is, but I follow people around Pittsburgh who are interested in air pollution. And we have a new source of air pollution coming online here, the Beaver Cracker Plant, which was put together by deals starting back with the Republican governor at the beginning of the fracking boom. And it's going to take ethane from wells in Western Pennsylvania, and it's the Falcon pipeline that's had a lot of problems that's going to deliver this to the Beaver Cracker Plant, and they're going to make plastic pellets. So the people around there, I think it's the Beaver Marcellus Shale Coalition, they're setting up monitors around the fence line of the beaver plant. And they say that already during the construction phase of this, they've had days when the air smells really bad. So I think they report this to the CREATE lab through a special app that's been developed by the CREATE lab at CMU that really quickly transfers the information in to a system that now has more than 70,000 reports in it over the last 4 years. And that helps them track the sources of the pollution. Then what do we do about it? That's another very good question. We have to get politically active and make sure that we have elected local and state representatives who care about our health and not about the industry. Because every time that we see something that the DEP does in the state of Pennsylvania, we call it the department where everything is permitted. And maybe that's a slightly extreme statement, but they do a lot of good things too. And past administrations have talked about preserving resources and supporting farmland and things like that. But they also permit with no thought to public health. So, you know, we need to change that wherever we live, because once a permit is given for pollution and there's attempts to develop what's said to be a green industry that makes gasoline out of methane, but they're going to take methane out of the ground to make that gasoline, as well as possibly harvesting some methane from cows and landfills. And it's not really green. It's not permitted yet. But Beaver Cracker Plant was permitted and went forward. There was nothing that could stop it. Maybe still we might find some way to stop it, but they have to become politically involved, and you have to have evidence about the problems and get the evidence into the newspapers, as some of our previous speakers suggested.
And I wanted to add that in regards to community-based monitoring, that what Earthworks does, the oil, does optical gas imaging. And this is the technology that often the oil and gas industry is required to use to look for leaks. So using, contacting Earthworks, which is a wonderful organization, and supporting them is a way to get involved in community monitoring also. And the EPA would like to hear comments about how to utilize that information from these third-party professionals to look for these leaks. So I just want to put a plug in for Earthworks and all of their incredible and wonderful work.
Thank you. I clap for that. I meant to mention them, but I got a little distracted. I also put into the chat a link to Frac Tracker. And that, if you go down a different branch in the Frac Tracker website, you might find more things about community monitoring too.
Well, thank you so much. I know there was another question in the chat about satellites, and I answered it very briefly, but does anybody have any information they'd like to share in addition about the use of satellites to track methane pollution?
There are quite a few satellites that seem to be out there right now, and there's a race for the technology. Some are up and running, some are up and coming. I know that Environmental Defense Fund has a METSAT, which is MET for methane, METSAT, that they're developing. And so this is a way that we can pinpoint through satellite imagery where all the methane leaks are. And so this is really gonna show the evidence in a much broader scale of where the leaks are happening. So no longer can industry not know where they are. They'll be more accountable, right? Because the evidence would be there.
Yes, thank you, Patrice. I think we're in a new era, hopefully, of monitoring methane emissions. And I did not see any other questions in the chat right offhand, but if anybody wants to drop any more in, please feel free. But I would love to leave you with this quote from Don Schreiber, who, as I said, could not join us. And I think that this points out some of the work both that Halt the Harm has been doing, but also many of the groups on this call. And it is just really chasing down some of the new and emerging threats. And so from this perspective, Dawn had been quoted in an article talking about some hydrogen, because one of the newest processes that the industry is wanting to hang their hat on is what's called blue hydrogen, which is, if anybody has any questions or wants to know more about that, just let us know. But it is a very bad idea, and it is essentially a, not even just greenwashing, but it's an end run around doing things from a climate positive perspective. So as I said, I just wanted to read off this quote from Dawn. I thought it was such a great quote. So Dawn, in this article, one of the articles I posted, said, "You can't cut methane emissions by producing more methane, even for hydrogen," he says. "As sure as cows eat grass and burp methane, operators that operate methane wells vent methane." Dawn goes on to say, "In defense of cows, no cow ever burped benzene, toluene, or xylene, and every single thing about them is biodegradable in life and in death." So with those immortal words from Dawn, again, if anybody has any other questions, I'll just look in the
I
chat
think
room.
JD has his hand up.
Okay, great. Thank you. I couldn't see that.
Hi,
JD?
JD.
Hey, neighbors. I want to clarify something if I can. And let me say for the group that don't know who I am, I've been doing this a long time. And I'm frustrated at the pace that we're not moving. And what I'm seeing continually go on is it's the same thing over and over. It seems like we continually do the same efforts, and it seems like there's no forward momentum. So if I sound frustrated or something, just understand that it has nothing to do with what's going on, but I do get frustrated. So one thing that I noticed within the methane rules that are being proposed by the feds, it looks like they're proposing to continue doing business as usual. And there should actually be an effort to stop the production of fossil fuels entirely. You know, this idea that trying to control the methane, that's something that's been going on for years, as we all know. But until we put a stop to this, and I don't know how many here know, there's actual glass that's being developed that generates electricity that you can see out of. So you can actually put all these buildings in glass. There's paint that generates electricity. There's so much technology that's being advanced. But what's happening is, by us just doing these incremental changes, we're not making the government, nor us as people, nor the industry to make changes that are necessary. And I mean, this is highly important that we actually change the whole concept of utilizing fossil fuels. And I think we've got to change that narrative and stop being captured by the idea that the fossil industry has to maintain business as usual, because it's going to hurt us all in the end. And then I'd like to clarify one last thing if I can. So please humor me on this. You know, toda gente, you know, when you consider the marginalized communities that have been doing this for a long time, my grandma's Black, and there was an article right now about how many families are finding out how many of them were enslaved. And today we're already going back to what's already happening. So what I would like to say when I said about everybody keeps talking about Colorado's new rules. And I'm going to use this example, not a comparison of the trauma and the drama de toda mi gente también, because, you know, I'm actually indigenous, my family, we're indigenous to this land. The torture and the drama we've had to endure. Every time somebody says something like this, well, it's better than we have. It's like people saying, well, we stopped whipping the man 15 times. We're used to beating him 20, now it's only 15. Well, we're still being beat. So if you use Colorado as an example, say they're trying, but don't say they're the best and they're robust, because if you guys listen to the COGCC events that happened yesterday, they have no intention of actually halting. The thousands of wells have already been authorized as a Colorado and Gas Conservation Commission is actually looking to revamp their rules. All these wells are going to be put in under the old rules. So no matter what happens, and they're just dragging this on. So I really do warn against, if we're going to be a united front and we're an alliance, let's be aware that when you building up one area like Colorado, you're actually condoning the status quo, because being a little bit better, todo es no bueno. I mean, it's not good because we're still in trouble. So don't praise the idea. Say, look, they decided to stop whipping that person 5 times because now they only whipping 15. So we have to understand what we're actually supporting and not supporting, because the media will take that, including the industry, and they'll take the words that we say here and they'll run with it. Well, look at these groups out here, these environmentalists. Todo está bueno por Korea, you know, I mean, so they're thinking everybody else thinks it's really good. And we've got to understand this, folks. We are in this together. This should be a national fight. And so whenever we're doing this within each state versus another state, we're in this together. Alianta, you know, let's go, let's move forward together. So let's understand that. So you can use Colorado, but don't say they're the most robust or something like that. Say that the people are trying, or that this is what they have or something like that. And I'm asking this as we go through as an alliance, because I want to remain part of this alliance. This is one of the best alliances I've ever seen. And we truly are national. And I just love this. So please understand the impatience that I feel, because I'm getting old. And to my generation, my ancestors, we look at the generations to come. And I really feel I failed a lot of them. And we don't, the years that the federal government on methane gave, we're looking at 18 years. Do we have 10 years even? I mean, you know, Mira, look at that. We just had that big fire in the community in December, like Lori mentioned, folks. So please, let's do this together. Let's understand this is a time of urgency. We're going to have to really buckle down in this. I'm saying from my heart, and you guys won't believe what an honor I really feel to be here, because to sit with groups from other states within this nation that we all love. I just can't say enough how much I appreciate it. But on the same hand, I'm going to speak up when things like this happen. And I do say thank you for allowing me the time to speak, because I think this is really important and I really do care.
And that's fantastic, JD. I just want to say, I think we all hear you loud and clear. And I know if Dawn were on here, and others would also applaud these words, but also understand, you know, that we're in a race to the bottom right now, and we can't stay in that race. I mean, we're basically racing each other in these gas producing states to see who can be the least bad, if that's a way to say it. But it's not good enough. It's not gonna fly. I mean, we're in serious trouble here. And
See, and that's why I feel so proud to be with you all, because I see us combining, and you won't believe the goosebumps I have right now, because we are really doing this, folks. I mean, we're really talking one state to another state, and you won't believe, I've never seen this I'm old and I've never seen this happen.
Yep.
So your generation, take pride in this and don't lose faith, because we're doing this, okay?
Thank you so much. And that's, I think, a fantastic note. I want to open it up to anyone else, but
I just want to
really
tell JD, oh, how moving. Thank you. Oh my gosh, I just feel, I will contact you. I got the information on how to contact you, so I will be talking to you. Thank you so much.
yes, again, thank you. And thank you from the bottom of my heart, and for Halt the Harm, and on behalf of Halt the Harm. Really, this is what we're trying to do. You know, we're trying to build a movement. We're trying to bring the states together, and really address the nefarious octopus like way that the industry has gotten around it for so long. Tammy, did you want to add anything else?
Hi, I am in the middle of picking up 2 kids from school and going to retrieve a backpack that was forgotten. So excuse me for seeming a bit out of breath. I am Tammy Murphy. I'm with Physicians for Social Responsibility in Pennsylvania. And I put in the chat a mention of a group that calls themselves WASIPA. They're in the area in southeastern Pennsylvania, near Philadelphia, in the suburbs around the Mariner East 2. They are a watchdog group, and They have really incredible ability to monitor everything that's going on there. They use drones and radiation detection and all kinds of other things to catch the kind of toxicity and the mess that the fossil fuel industry is making there. And if anybody wants to be in touch with them, they do trainings and they can offer advice on equipment for citizen science and all kinds of other things. So reach out to me if you want. My name and contact information is in the chat. And I'd love to put people in touch with them because I feel like what they're doing here in Southeast Pennsylvania needs to be done pretty much everywhere. Thanks.
Thank you, Tammy. I was just scrolling through the chat to see if I can grab that link again and repost it, and I'll get that right away. And as everyone has seen, and I think I just want to emphasize this again as we close out, this really was for the grassroots and from the grassroots. And, you know, we're literally out on the streets as we speak. Some of us doing this, wearing our masks, getting our kids, but just, you know, this is hitting us, and this is hitting us in our homes, and we've got to stop it. So again, thank you to everyone. Thank you so much, JD, for some of your closing remarks. I really appreciate everybody's participation and all the different speakers bringing in their different perspectives. That's just been so wonderful. And so please feel free to reach out to Halt the Harm, keep the conversation going, join our methane discussion group, and we will see you out on the streets. Thank you so much, everyone.